Hey guys, today we're going to go over the best practices of teaching. When we look at teaching, we're looking at working together with teachers, we're looking at businesses, we're looking at talking to adults, we're looking at talking to youth, and there's a lot of dynamics that come into this. So what we've done is we've put together some of the best practices that our educators have found over the years, and we're hoping that that's helpful for you as you're coming in. So we're gonna get started. The very first thing you do in every presentation is the exact same slide. It's our introduction to CAPSA. So as you read the CAPSA slide and go over that for people to see, there's a couple key points that you want to make sure. We like to make sure that everybody knows what CAPSA stands for. CAPSA stands for Citizens Against Physical and Sexual Abuse. One of the reasons we make sure to go over that, especially when we're talking to younger students in our middle school and high school classes, is so that if their parents ask, hey, what's going on? Who came in? What'd you learn at school today? And they say CAPSA, and their parents are like, well, what is CAPSA? They can at least repeat that back. And their parents have a little bit more information about what they're learning and who's teaching them. And if they have more questions, they then know who to contact. Along with making sure that they know what CAPSA stands for, we want to go over the part on the slide that says help, hope, and healing. CAPSA's here to provide help. Our goal is to give hope to those who don't have it anymore. And we do that through the healing process. So as we go through that, we want to make sure that people understand. We also have a list of services that we provide on that slide. You don't have to take the time to go over every single service, but pick a couple that people can refer to. When I give the slide, most of the time, I relax a little bit and I point to it and say, there's a lot of information on here. But what you're looking at is therapy services. We have advocates. We make sure that our services are diverse so that we have people that are bilingual to be able to help. We go over the shelter and the 24-hour live support line. I always am sure to end with our services of education so that they can make that connection back to CAPSA. Along with doing that, what I'm going through is the little piece above that says free and confidential. Now this is the emphasis of this slide. We're CAPSA, we offer these things, but everything we offer is free and confidential. Other places don't have that. And it's something that's unique and provides more of that hope for those who feel like they're stuck in a spot. They don't have to worry about that barrier. And they also feel like they'll be trusted and believed when they come in. Along with that information, during this time is when I will take a minute to say, hey, so as a CAPSA employee, there's a few things that I am held to, and not just as a CAPSA employee, but as an adult in the state of Utah, I fall under what we call as mandatory reporters. So if you're over the age of 18 and you know of a few different instances, you are a mandatory reporter. One of those being if somebody is abusing or neglecting a individual under the age of 18, right? If they're 18 and younger and there's abuse going on, I am mandated to report that to DCFS and law enforcement if I feel it's an immediate situation that needs to be addressed right now. But if it's something I'm suspecting or I'm aware of something that's happened, I can just call DCFS. Along with making sure that we report that, we also have to report any abuse that we become aware of to our vulnerable adults and elderly. So that's also that. With that, we are not reporting to DCFS, but we're reporting to Adult Protective Services in that situation. You can find numbers and more information on this going through the 40-hour training, as well as referring back to some information on our SharePoint. So along with that mandatory reporting, the other two elements that we have to be sure to report is if somebody tells us of their intent to harm another individual or to harm themselves. Okay, so all of that falls into mandatory reporting. We also want to share with them, hey, the reason I'm sharing this stuff about mandatory reporting is not so that you won't share things with me, but so that you have the power to decide if you want to share that. If I'm in the middle of a presentation and we're doing the dating violence and I've gone over this slide at the beginning and someone decides to share with me that they have had a violent situation in their life and they've been a victim of abuse, I automatically have to report that. But if they really didn't want me to report that, and they didn't know that I was a mandatory reporter, they may feel a lack of trust with me. So we want to make sure that they know so that they have the power to choose what they want to share during our class. So going over the information about CAPSA, We want to make sure they know about mandatory reporting. And then the third thing we want to make sure we talk about here at the beginning of class is being trauma informed. As a Capstone employee, we are trauma informed. We want to make sure that our class is trauma informed and the space that we're teaching is a safe place for people to share and to be heard. And that also means that if somebody has gone through a situation that is very vulnerable for them to experience again, or if they feel that they may be triggered, we want to set that up so that they know. So that means if someone comes to me and says, hey, we just talked about this and I am reliving my experiences in my mind, we know what we're going to do. We have an action plan. So when we start out the class, we say, hey, today we're going to be talking about this. So if you're talking about dating violence or sexual violence, you need to be sure to go over these things right away, saying, this is what we're going to talk about, and it may be a little difficult. While we do that, we're also saying, if we bring something up today and it's hard for you, feel free to step out. Now, you should probably set that up with the teacher beforehand, saying, hey, I'm going to tell your students they could do this, and make sure that they know that could be a cue for them to step out and follow up with the student. Or you can let students know, hey, I'm here after class if you need to do that. So again, that's our starting up. How do we enter into class? And then we'll move on from here. So with classroom management, there are a few things that we need to start with. One is setting expectations. The first person we set expectations with is the teacher. When a teacher contacts you, letting you know that they want to do a presentation, you need to check a few things with them first. Make sure you have the right time, the right date, how many hours you'll be there, and we want to check to see what equipment we'll need to bring with us. If you're in a school with a teacher, most of the time they have a laptop or a desktop and projector, but you're going to want to make sure you bring your clicker. If you're not in a school setting, let's say you're at a business, you want to make sure that, again, you check with whoever's setting up the presentation, but best practice is to always make sure you bring a projector, a laptop, an HDMI cable, or whatever cords are needed, as well as your clicker again. Once you've set up those expectations of equipment, you also want to set up the expectation with whoever is scheduling the presentation about how things will run. That can mean a few things. Sometimes we go into classrooms where the class can get a little rowdy, and we want to make sure that we understand we have a responsibility as the adult running the class to manage what's going on, manage the behavior, but sometimes things are a little bit out of our control and we need that help of a teacher. So we want to set up that expectation beforehand of, hey, how do we want to handle this? Sometimes we'll start out by saying, hey, we're teaching this topic today. I've been in your class before. So if kids kind of act out a little bit, is it okay if they come and sit back by you? Is that something that you want me to call them out on? Or would you like to be the one that invites them to come back and sit next to you for the remainder of the class? Sometimes we just don't know that it's going to happen until it's happened. So the other step that we would take would be saying, okay, we went through the class, it got a little rowdy, I know I'm coming back tomorrow. So after the class, we can go up and be comfortable and confident with our teachers and say, hey, today was a little rough. I'm hoping we can smooth that out for tomorrow. I'm wondering if I can depend on you tomorrow to help me out and invite kids to come and sit back to you when you notice them doing A, B, or C. That's another way to just set those expectations and again, build trust and confidence with our teachers. You could do the same thing with businesses depending on who your audience is. You probably shouldn't have to deal with that if you're presenting to a group of professionals. The other audience we want to make sure to set up our expectations with is the actual audience. In schools, we're talking about with our students. With our students, we want to make sure that they understand that these are the objectives that we're planning to go through, which you'll see at the beginning of each presentation, and how we plan to do that. We want to make sure we set up group norms. Those group norms help us have, again, like I mentioned earlier, a safe place, meaning that we can talk about things, we can share things, but we don't feel forced to do any of that. It's something that if we want to, we can. But it's open, it's confidential, it's not something that we're gonna bring back and use against somebody if they share a story or whatnot. So setting those expectations. This can be done in a few different ways. When developing group norms, my favorite form is to have the whiteboard behind me. And what I do is I talk to students and I'll say, hey, we want to set up group norms. I give them the explanation of what group norms are. And I ask them, hey, what do you want your group norms to be? If I have a class that's not going to willingly shout out some group norms, maybe I'll set a couple, such as respect. we talk about, cool, respect's great. What does respect mean to you? And as they list that out, those become our group norms of what is going to be the normal attitudes and behaviors during our time together. If I'm in a class multiple days in a week, or even once a week for a few weeks, I'll take a picture of those at the end of the day so that I can bring them up again the next time we're there, and make sure if there's any that we need to change, add to, that way we have that. So again, setting group norms is essential when we're starting our classes. The next piece in classroom management is knowing how to answer questions. There's a lot of different types of questions that come up when we're presenting, whether to students or to adults. So the 3 types of questions I want to refer to work for both settings. The first one is what to do if somebody asks you a question and you straight up don't know the answer to it. Sometimes we want to try and make our way through it and seem like, we know all of the information, which, coming in as the experts, we do feel pressure to know. However, we don't want to make things up or tell somebody something that just isn't true. So if we really don't know, there's a couple options. The first and safest way is always to say, you know what, I'm not exactly sure, but what's your information? And I'm going to go back and figure that out, and I'll get it back to you. If you don't want to ask for their direct information, you can always say, hey, I'll send that information to whoever set up the presentation, and then they can pass that along, just depending on who your audience is as well. Another thing you could do in those situations, again, admitting I don't have an answer to that, but I'm curious, what are the thoughts of the group? And open it up to group discussion. The thing you need to be aware of if you're going to open up to group discussion is bringing it back again to saying, these are some really great ideas. Again, I'm not sure the exact answer, but I love where this discussion sent us, and I'll follow up and bring that information back for you guys to have. So while we're answering those questions, there's other questions that come up. Sometimes in a group, we are going to be talking to those who are familiar with abusive situations because they've been survivors. We're going to talk sometimes to people who have been perpetrators. And we're also going to talk to some people that are very unaware of the world around them as far as abuse. And so when we look at that, we want to make sure that we're being mindful of everyone's situations. We can't know all of it, but we can be aware. So sometimes when we're bringing up tough situations, people can get a bit combative, whether they've been a survivor or whether they have been on the other end of that and maybe been the one that caused harm for someone else's life. They might argue something, be very stuck to something, have a very strong belief, and that's okay. We're not coming in our presentations to try and change everybody's attitudes. What we're trying to do is share information. So if somebody comes up to us and they're very combative in their questions or their responses, we want to make sure that we show them that validation of, I hear you, I'm understanding what you're saying. And sometimes we may have to agree to disagree, but making sure that we maintain a safe environment for everyone involved. If it's very strong and they are not wanting to back down, one of the things we can do is say, this is a great conversation, but let's set it up for afterwards and take time to take it back a step, bring it back into our presentation, and then after the class, we'll come back together with that individual and discuss it further. Again, sometimes we may have to agree to disagree, and that's okay. Along with answering their questions that may be combative, you also sometimes have delicate questions. Delicate questions can present themselves in a few different ways. One of the ways that delicate questions present themselves in middle school or high school will be some child that is asking, what is this or what is that? And you sometimes are like, I've never had to define this. It's not uncommon when teaching sexual violence for someone to say, well, what is rape? Or what is sex? Straight up questions that deserve answers. We want to make sure that we are maintaining a professional boundary and not going so far as explaining things to an inappropriate level, but giving brief definitions. These definitions can be found in our SharePoint in the education areas. If you're unsure, I would suggest you become familiar with them before doing your presentations, as well as doing your background work to make sure that you have these definitions. Sometimes if it's really delicate and you can tell the whole class is uncomfortable, you can say, that's a great question and I have a good answer for you, but I think it's something we should talk about after class. If it's a question that's delicate and you don't know the answer to that, sometimes you can refer to a teacher as well, especially in a health class. If a kid will ask a question that you're like, I'm not sure if that's appropriate for me to talk about, let's see if we can chat with your teacher after class, and you simply guide them through that discussion. So those are 3 types of questions we like to answer. Another piece of classroom management is working through activities. Most of our presentations are skill-based, especially in a school setting, and then a good deal still in our business setting and community setting. When we're in a school, we want to make sure that we know how big our room is, know how much time we have, and know what equipment we need for that activity. That way we have enough for everybody to be involved. This is something that does come a little bit with time as you practice, but you can also check with whoever set up your presentation, whether that be a teacher or a coach, beforehand so that you can prep a little better. If you're going into a business and you're not sure of how much space or how many people will be there, again, best practice is to ask, but always be flexible. Have a backup plan for your activity. If you were planning to have people move throughout the room and you get there and there's not enough space, have a way for you to change it to a turn and talk to your partner and report back. Think, pair, share is a great backup activity when needed. You also want to be mindful of your time, like I mentioned. Sometimes activities can get away from us. So set a timer. Make sure that you are being mindful of yourself during activities. Don't tune out. Make sure that you're walking amongst the group and participating so that you can bring it back when you feel the room starting to kind of settle down after that activity. The last piece of classroom management we want to go over is after the presentation or after the class, making sure that you give space for students or adults to come and talk with you after. A lot of times there are questions that come up that were not set up or given the opportunity to be talked about during the presentation, or maybe they felt uncomfortable asking that beforehand. So what you want to do is make sure to set up that time and let them know that there will be that time in case they're not comfortable. Disclosures can be an intimidating thing to deal with as an educator going out for CAPSA. You're going to run into people of all ages and all stages of life. Sometimes they may be younger than you, sometimes they may be older than you. Either way, survivors are survivors, and when they feel that you are someone that will listen to them and believe their story, they're going to come and share that with you. So we want to make sure that you're prepped. So if somebody comes in after a presentation and says, hey, can I share this with you? That is a perfect time for you to put on that hat of advocate and listen. Again, if they're underage, we need to be mindful of the mandatory reporting and make sure they're aware of that. It's never a bad thing to pause them as they're starting to share something and remind them, I just want to tell you, I'm a mandatory reporter. I want to support you and I want to hear your story, but I do need to share this information with you before you go. If they're willing to continue, listen up. This is where we go. If you feel like their story has a lot of information, ask them if it's okay for you to take out a notepad and a pencil and keep track of that. We want to make sure to get that where it needs to go. That's again if you were needed to do mandatory reporting, right? If they come up to you and want to disclose and just talk it through again, you're listening. Our goal in all of this though is to connect everyone back to CAPSA services. We know that our services can help, whether that's referring them to the services they need or if that's getting them to therapy where they can enter into that healing process. If someone's disclosing, listen. Don't interrupt. Don't gossip about it later. Believe them and share the resources of CAPSA, whether it's you calling in with them or giving them the information that they need. Along with that, sometimes presentations are going great and someone decides to disclose during the presentation. The number one thing again is that they're validated, that they know that they're being heard. We believe them and it's not their fault. However, in the middle of a presentation may not be the best time for this to go down. So what we want to do in that situation is let them know they're heard. I'm so sorry that happened to you. I appreciate you sharing that. Maybe this is something we can discuss a little bit afterwards. As we go through that process with them again, they know they're heard, they know they're believed, and they feel like they can trust you. So we set up that time to talk with them after class. One of the common questions for presenters is, what do I wear when I'm going to a presentation? As you now know, having gone through all of the new hire information, our standard at CAPSA is business casual. When we as the Education and Service Awareness Department go out into the community, sometimes our attire needs to change just a little bit to match our environment. If I'm going into a school to do a presentation, if I'm going in a pantsuit, those kids probably aren't going to connect with me super well. But if I go in with holey jeans and a raggedy old t-shirt, they're also not going to respect me. So we have to find that middle ground. When we go into schools, we want to make sure that we're still wearing, if you want to wear jeans, that's fantastic, but you're still wearing a nice dress shirt. When we're going into businesses, we want to make sure we're, again, meeting CAPSA standard, but if that business is even more formal, we're going to step up to meet that standard as well. We want to make sure that we're relatable, but that we're also seen as professionals. We're experts in our field, and we want to represent that in the way that we take care of ourselves and present ourselves during our time with our audience. When we go in to do a presentation, we are coming in as the experts. If I come in to do my presentation and I just rolled into the office, grabbed my laptop and ran over and did not spend the time preparing, it is very obvious. People can tell when we've put in the effort to know our information. Before going to do a presentation, it is highly recommended that you take the same amount of time to review your material. If I'm doing an hour presentation, take anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour to make sure that you know your transitions. Did you need to make some changes to fit your audience? Are you using the language that will relate to your audience? Have you looked over the activities? Are they the right activities for that audience? Or do you need to choose from the scenario banks? Be sure that you have set up your presentation to fit your audience and that you feel confident giving it no matter what happens. Sometimes things don't go as planned when we go into a presentation, but if you've prepped and you know your material, you'll be able to pull it off even if you don't have that information up in front of you. Again, these were just a few of the best practices that we've pulled together from some of our educators over the past couple of years. As you go through and start doing your presentations, if questions arise, please reach out. Let your supervisor know that you have questions, that you need support. There may be trainings that are available that can help you going forward. Again, being an educator is lots of fun. We hope you enjoy it and enjoy being part of our team.